Hey, Mira, welcome back. Happy 2023.
Yeah, same to you, Jake. Very happy to be back on Local Listens and have the opportunity to speak to your audience again.
It's
Thank you for having
fantastic. Yeah, it's great to see you again. And it's cool that you were the first guest ever back in 2022 and now first guest ever for 2023. So that's a cool full circle
me.
moment. And for people who may not be familiar, can you just let everyone know about your website and Moon and Rune, Gnostic Wellness, and all your wonderful achievements that you've had online? What's been going on with you? Share with us.
So, hi everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Mira Taylor. I'm an integrative therapist who focuses on concepts of mental wellness that really bring back the concepts of psyche and psychology. So, for those of you who don't know, the word psyche as a root word, or as its more original meaning, actually means spirit or soul, essence. And so, I really focus on bringing a practical sensibility back into the mental wellness that I provide for folks through my guided wellness sessions. And a lot of what we approach with that are some of the things we spoke about last time we did a show together, which are things that have to do with sort of archetypal awareness or motifs and themes as far as psychology goes, as well as, just sort of building that intuitive or personal rapport with yourself again and bringing back forms of ritual and spirituality into one's life that provide for like a really sustainable sense of wellness. So, my goal with a lot of my clients and a lot of the information that I share is to make it feel practical and approachable, something that you can continue to bring into your daily life that doesn't, feel like you got to be kind of making that super duper extra effort or going outside of yourself to really provide yourself that nourishment. And of course, with the goal that at some point, many of my clients feel like they can provide a lot of the tools and sort of modalities that we talk about in session as something that they are working with on a daily basis for themselves. So I basically teach or guide with the intention of providing that sort of space of wisdom and guidance from a more wholly centered and wholly realized place for my clients.
Lovely, lovely. And for those of you who are curious, our first ever chat, which is episode number one, Mira and I went through an initial consultation, and it was really cool to think about the linguistic structure of my beliefs and to be guided through this process of looking at language, looking at patterns and habits in a brand new way. So I appreciate what you've been doing, and I'm really excited to hear what else has been going on and how you've been learning and building more. And I want to start with a question about Gnosticism.
Okay.
So you have the word Gnostic wellness or the phrase Gnostic wellness in your brand, right? That's just want to make sure I get that
I
right.
don't anymore,
Don't
actually.
anymore. Okay, I'm glad I
So
asked.
that's okay. I'm actually happy to talk on it, which is
Mm,
that basically I removed it because there were a lot of people who were misinterpreting what Gnosticism is, or at least from my root understanding and connection to it, as far as what I believe the Gnostic tradition is and what it really spoke to. And that basically the root of that, or the concept of Gnosticism, which got really complicated over time, and there were all sorts of people who built their own, creation stories and sort of
mm,
their own version of things. But that the point of Gnosticism was that to seek for God is to seek for wisdom and guidance from within yourself. That the human mind, the psyche, the imagination, the creative will and power of force of consciousness that resides inside of us, that we can really become more wholly realized with, more self-actualized with, is what I understood, as Gnosticism. So I still, speak to it, and I still
mm.
believe in what I understood as the more root tenets or wisdoms of it. But I ended up taking it out because there were a lot of people that basically, would look up Gnosticism and see what some of the other Gnostics had believed
Right.
for themselves, not dissimilar to many scriptural texts, Bible and Quran included, right? That there are places that there were decisions made about whose story was true, or what was and what wasn't. And the reality is that Gnosticism really also is intended just to promote a sense of self philosophy
Mm,
and have a focus on the concept, or the focus of your spirituality being that you're kind of centering it around the wisdom tradition and the concepts of mysticism that had everything to do with inner revelation and inner truth and finding God within yourself, basically. So there are still some sort of root truths that exist across many of the stories, which is that the exterior world is, illusionary, right? And so I'm always careful with that one too, because there are loads of people who hear the word illusionary and immediately have like a dissonance toward it, or immediately assign a value or attribute a sense of like malevolence to that.
Like a
And so the
prison.
thing
That's
I
how
would
most
say,
people confuse it with, right?
well, the thing I would say with that is that you reap what you sow from such wisdom, in the sense that if you hear that the outside world is an illusion, and you have an internal belief system that only sees the spectrum of reality as that word meaning something malevolent, that has deeper truths for you to understand about yourself and your inner
Mhm.
psyche, as opposed to it being an exterior truth that is like consensus truth for all. So I like the illusion. I like the magic show. I'm very happy to be at it. Lots of us, at this point know, even from the scientific model, that reality is an illusion, right? It's light and sound waves and frequency patterns vibrating at certain rates, certain speeds within a certain electromagnetic field, and that's what creates matter and form, blah, blah, blah. There's a really wonderful book that I've read actually called You're Imagining Things. It's like a very short read if anyone wants to enjoy something that's like a smaller read. If you've got resolutions on your list to start reading more this year, that's a good one. But it basically speaks to that. So yes, everything is an illusion. Gnosticism does hold tenets and truths to that across almost all of its cosmologies and philosophies. But the reality is that it's, for me, it's just something that helps me realize that inner truth and inner wisdom and those things that speak from a place that resides inside of us are where our relationship with God is intended to be, and where we're intended to cultivate and grow and develop that relationship further in every lifetime.
Well said, Mira. And it's really funny. You brought up so many things that I was planning to ask you about, including like the idea that Gnosticism is misinterpreted very often. It's just funny how the synchronicities have lined up. And one in particular is, I've got a little notebook here, and I wrote down on the very top of this page, Hermetic wisdom. And what you brought up was all is mental, it's all in your head, quote unquote, but like, in a benevolent way from our point of view, I could say, or from my point of view, it's I share your belief. This quote unquote illusion is wonderful, but I definitely wanted to ask you about that path to a relationship with God through yourself. And there's a great quote that I always think about. I believe it's the Gospel of Thomas, and I just wanted to hear your reaction to it, your thoughts on it. You've probably heard this before. It's a time when Christ had said that if you bring out what is within you, then it'll save you, and if you don't bring out yeah, if you don't bring out what is within you, it'll
It will
destroy you.
for you.
Right? Yeah.
You know what? It's a wisdom that was born to me very early on in my awakening process. And again, that becomes one of those you reap what you sow from those statement moments, right? So it's everything to do with like kind of how we over time can learn even new interpretations of something like that. But yes, I believe that it has everything to do with the fact that you either are self-actualizing or returning to source, right? So it's not to place a judgment in either direction. All things expand and contract as a part of how reality works, right? Spiritual aspects most assuredly included, because spirit as consciousness is the root of all being. So it really is just about all of these individual forms and expressions that God has created, right? And when we say God, it's like spirit, creator, consciousness,
Mhm.
Allah,
Insert
so on and so forth, right?
mystical being. Yes.
Nameless, whatever it is to you, right?
Mhm.
And so the reality for most people is that they spend a whole lot of time putting up sort of limitations on their relationship with God based on what the exterior world tells them or dictates to them in a more overly literalized sense. So one of the very interesting revelations I've had recently was that whole concept that many of the scriptural texts are referred to as, the Gospel of Thomas included, the literal word of God. But no one said that that meant that we have to take those words literally. Right. So this is one of those misinterpretations that happen too, is like, okay, yes, it is literally the word of God. The word I speak is literally the word of God. The word
Right
you
on.
speak is literally the word of God. The word that's written in Alice in Wonderland is literally the word of God. Does not mean that we have to take it literally. And so this was one of the things I always really appreciated about actually the Kabbalistic understandings of text, which have a lot to do with interpretation of textual information from the standpoint of things like gematria, but that Kabbalah actually is a word that means secret or hidden. And so it's really about understanding that many of these texts have truths for you that are not so literal, that are intuitive, that are intended for you to have a moment where you're having a subtle awareness of what God is to you in that present moment by your experience of the text in the present moment, as opposed to what did this person mean by it in their present moment and whatever year AD,
Is
right?
that a good example of when people say the map is not the territory in that case?
And it's that whole concept of the forest for the trees,
Right.
right? So it's all about, and I work with all sorts of books in this way. And I think we may have talked about this the last time I was on. It's a concept that from a more orthodox concept is referred to as bibliomancy, or divining revelation from text, usually from scripture, but you can realistically do it from anything, right? So actually one of the ones that I do it from all the time is Alice in Wonderland. I got a really interesting revelation from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea like 2 weeks ago, which had something to do with the trajectory of human consciousness into the new year, and like that something big is going to happen around January 10th to like really catalyst that, or push us sort of more quickly in that direction of evolution of consciousness. So be on the lookout. But I think a
Let me
lot of
just say, folks, it's January 6th, 2022. So, I'd be interested, not to place weight on a specific prediction, but just to let people know for context. It's Friday, January 6th, 2022. It's a full moon in Cancer right now. I believe it's exciting. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but I had to say that.
Oh no, you know what? I'm happy for the moon to be full in the mother archetype.
Oh yeah.
And actually, for those of you, as I'm studying Islam and the Quran pretty heavily right now, along with Sufism and just the Arabic language in general as a part of my divinity school courses. So for those of you who don't know, a fun new word for everyone is the word Badr, which means full moon in Arabic. It also happens to be the name of Sinbad from 1001 Nights. It's his father.
Nice.
So just some fun stuff to throw out there. But I'm happy for the full wisdom of the maternal in the full moon to be shared on this podcast
Yes,
the
yes.
next date.
And
As
there's
you think about archetypes and archetypal correlations.
Yeah, I mean, for archetypes, I have a question I've been dying to ask you all day. Now I guess I'm living to ask you it if I flip that around. When we think about, okay, I think I said January 6th, 2023, and January 6th, 2021 was a much different date. And I want to ask you about the rebel archetype. And in your view, whether it's through pop culture or whether it's through your own experiences out in the wild and feeling in yourself the whole spectrum of archetypes, how do you relate to the rebel, or do you have a particular reaction to the rebel in your own life?
So for me, oftentimes my most rebellious acts are to do with my choice to trust my heart as the voice of God through me. as opposed to what others tell me
Mhm.
is the voice or understanding of God. That is how my rebel exists and breathes. But it's also how I hold authority over myself. So for me, those two archetypes have been married, and that is as it's intended to be. But from sort of that concept of like from the marketing perspective and the rebel archetype, and everything that's got to do with sort of the concept of participation mystique and how we're
Mhm.
programmed to have an interest in images and symbols that we're taught are symbols of rebellion, or what it means to be a rebel, right? The irony is that for most people who live in the rebel archetype, they don't act, their true nature is actually not that rebellious. It's just that they sort of abide by the given programmatic structure that is, I'm a rebel, right? So for
Hmm.
me, and I used to live this, right? Like full truth, I used to live this, and I've sort of joked about this on another podcast that I would see a sugar skull on something, and like the participation mystique was like, that's me, I must have it, right? So and man, oh man, I spent a lot of money that I shouldn't have because of that.
It's an
And,
expensive archetype, right?
well, you know what? It is. And most of them are, but I would say that's the one that's kind of the most popular right now.
Mm,
And I think there is something to be said for basically that being a sort of fractality or pattern of behavior through humanity,
mm,
through the centuries and through time, right? So there's kind of this understanding from folks who see that more macro view of how timelines and the fractal nature of behavior as humanity works, that kind of see that rolling around the bend, right? And go, okay, we're gonna up the rebel archetype, so
mm,
that people feel that sort of like participation mystique to want to buy things, right? And so you'll see this in movies, you'll see this on television all the time, but you'll also just start to see it in like what the basic like home decor style is,
mm.
or what the fashion style is, right? And again, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with it, but for me, I also like to play rebel in assigning an understanding of rebel to people who a lot of folks wouldn't necessarily have a inherent desire, or sort of want to place it upon. So Christ is actually an excellent example of a rebel,
Absolutely.
right? Martin Luther King, excellent example of a rebel. Actually, the Dalai Lama
Mhm.
and a lot of the Buddhist traditions are excellent examples of rebellion. You think about the act in Tiananmen Square, which of course was awful, right? But that there is that sort of state of rebellion that is rooted in an understanding of self-authority and God as residing within, and that anything that trust is really trying to be authoritative or dictatorial over others and their free will, is where the authority and the rebel can meet within each of us
Mhm.
to stand against it. That is like our most fully realized self. So I really like looking at things actually and seeing like, okay, well, this has the rebel archetype in it, but how is it actually trying to be dictatorial and authoritative?
Mm.
Because that's not unusual either, right? Like that's the thing that a lot of rebels don't want to admit either, is that for you to go out with a megaphone and scream in someone's face that they got to believe in what you believe in, is no different and no better than the authoritarian who does it through the bureaucratic model, through politics or spirituality, right?
Mm.
It's just that it's the same essence in different clothing, right? So that's always a good exercise for folks, and I invite a lot of folks to kind of think about a lot of those archetypes that have an opposite, and ask themselves how they could see that in both, right? So the other way that a lot of people can do this is, if you have someone that you view as a hero, how can you, and there's like a villain or a bad guy that is their constant opposition, how can you make the intentional mindful time to try and have, a different view, right?
Mm.
Like how can you kind of flip flop it around to see how that other person that's labeled as the villain might not be the villain, and how the hero might feel like the villain to the other side, basically. But these are all really excellent exercises that are just intended to like kind of open up the mind and help people see the more full spectrum of reality that isn't so stuck in that dualistic model. And in doing so, it really helps deconstruct the duality mindset that for a lot of people is the thing that's creating massive shadows in them, or creating massive ego blindnesses that are blocking their ability to grow and develop, as their own self-actualized self in this lifetime. It's not a ghost, I promise. Well, spirit, not that kind of ghost.
Dog's very cute.
But so that's where I work with the rebel archetype a lot. Is it something that you have kind of had a more personal experience of, or is it something you've been kind of like mindfully playing with for yourself recently?
I've been thinking about it. So I teach high schoolers, and at the
Oh man, there's
time,
so much of that dichotomy there. It's kind
yeah,
of
right,
funny.
right. And while you were speaking, I was thinking of this image of like a moral landscape. And in certain ways, you could create a dualistic system that only sees good and evil. And that's a two-dimensional reality, right? You don't want to live in a 2D reality. If anything, like the more dimensions, the more rich and exciting life is. So I think it's cool that we receive these stories and we create them ourselves, where the villain will have some kind of backstory, and they I it might be dangerous to justify the villain's actions, but it is something very human and very special to feel what someone else feels. And I was thinking recently about I know it's controversial, but the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime, that Lord of the Rings spinoff, and how this is showing a scenario where the orcs of Mordor are coming, and obviously there's going to be a rebellion and the heroes are going to fight back. But there's also the humans who are not willing to fight, who are being recruited by this dark entity to work for the evil side. And that's always fascinating to me, that like humanity pitted against something subhuman like orcs, or something that's dehumanized, is always within the sphere of influence. So it's interesting to think about that. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about this word evil, and how through different ideas like cognitive remodeling or neuroplasticity, how might you look at the word Satan or adversary, or work with that concept in your own philosophy?
So one of the wisdoms that I will definitely share is kind of an older concept that evil rests in the eye of the beholder, right? And so this speaks to kind of that concept of the more root understanding of Christ and of Gnosticism, that what you see out here has everything to do with what's interior to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are seeing evil in the world, it has something to say about your own psyche and the things that you seem to have a desire for, whether it's a healthy desire or not, right? And so this becomes the work of whether or not someone's willing to accept that truth, but to see, like it's sort of like, if you have a desire to seek it out, answering the question, why do I have a desire to seek it out? If I truly want peace and I truly want to exist in a world that to me on a personal level is without those things, right? It's my work to do to stop trying to seek it out.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different than, there's kind of like a sort of like a heroism archetype that
Mm-hmm.
exists, that basically needs a bad guy or wants a bad guy. That's the deeper unfortunate truth, is that the heroism identity kind of creates a deeper subconscious desire for that to exist in the world, so that it can feel a sense of purpose and feel a sense of worth. But from the concepts of like linguistic therapy and sort of belief system restructuring, I am a massive nerd when it comes to understanding the
Excellent.
root understandings. Yeah. Well, you know what? It stands for no one ever really dies for a reason. So I'm happy to be a nerd. In infinity forever, right? Eternium forever. But the reality is that for most people, they don't understand where that word originally came from. So the word Satan is actually a word that was started in Greco-Roman politics, and just philosophical debate, right? So, but basically there were meeting places, and a lot of people have seen these in movies or in shows, or somewhere along the way in their understanding of history, there were these meeting rooms where people of influence would get together and debate their philosophies, whether they were political or spiritual, and that anyone who opposed you on your view was referred to as your Satan. Right? So the concept of Satan as a more root structure understanding, or sort of emanatory embodiment that is removed from those more complex narratives that the human ego structure has placed on it, is just purely opposition itself. And I was working with this concept the other day. So the interesting thing about this is that if you were to look at molecular structure, right? So from that sort of Hermetic principle of as above, so below, let's look at the most root space of creation, which would be molecular structure. Where do you find opposition always in molecular structure? Between an electron and a proton, right? But it is actually that tension that exists between the two of them that creates covalent bonds over time. The more resistance there is to begin with, the more tension there is between two molecules, the stronger the bond is once they actually bond, right? Wow. Now, of course, the irony being that molecules never actually truly bond. There's something to be said for that in You're Imagining Things book, which basically talks about the fact that nothing ever really touches, right? Like, I'm not actually really touching this book. There's a vibrational tension that's occurring between myself and the material, and et cetera, et cetera. We won't go in too deeply into the biology of that. But that basically, for me, this is the work that I did to really deconstruct away from that sort of overly personified construct of the emanatory expression that was supposed to be understood as, Satan. So the reality is that if you are someone who sees opposition in a way that makes you want to destroy it, Satan is living inside of your psyche as the one who is seeing opposition that way. Right?
Yeah, it sounds like a possession of some kind of like it's a inner Hegelian dialect. Like you're creating the problem for yourself. You're immediately reacting, usually not rationally, and then the solution is to destroy. It's like, why would you do that to yourself?
Right. So, and I don't remember if we said it in the first podcast, but one of my favorite Carl Jung quotes is that anything that irritates us or that causes tension or resistance between us and another has something to teach us about ourselves.
One of my favorite quotes.
So, if you feel that someone is acting as a Satan to you in an exterior way, it's up to you to go, okay, nope, that's in me. How can I see myself in this in a way that can teach me?
Yes.
Right. Yes. So one of the more interesting things too about kind of root languages and studying language across many languages, so for me, it's been fascinating to know that the word sin in Spanish means without. Right.
Con and sin.
What's that?
Con is with and sin is without. Yeah.
Right. Now, in English, those are two words that if you look at them, have pretty unhealthy connotations to them, right?
Absolutely.
Or sort of more malevolent connotations to them. So it's really, I urge people to sort of open their eyes to other cultures and other forms of spirituality and other languages, because it'll really help open your mind in that regard. One of the things that's been most fascinating to me as I was studying Sanskrit, and a lot of the, sort of the root understandings of Buddhism, is that in Sanskrit, the word Devi, which is Devi, one letter short of another word that,
right.
By the way, get into that, because actually from a biblical connotation, the devil and Satan are not the same entity. And a lot of people don't understand that either. But regardless, so in Sanskrit, the word Devi, again, just one letter short of devil, is a word that means goddess.
Right.
Okay. And even in Latin root word, the word sin is a word that originally was the name for the deity or the emanation of the moon. And even in Christian and more Orthodox understanding, the moon is something that's associated with wisdom and revelation, and basically everything to do with sort of, Sophia, as far as like sort of that revelationary concept of God and where wisdom comes from, or what it's symbolized by. And so another interesting thing about that is that one of the other words that means moon is amen, or a moon.
Mm.
And every form of Christianity that prays, what does it end prayer with?
Right to
Amen.
the moon, right to the lunar system. Yes.
So, there's just been a lot of sort of misinterpretation through language and scripture over time and across spiritualities, which again becomes the space of like an invitation for reinterpretation in the present moment. That for those people, that interpretation was their Satan, right? Because they saw Satan in that word, or they saw something malevolent in that word. I don't, and this goes back to my understanding of, the concepts of Gnosticism. I don't have to choose to believe in that interpretation, especially if it places malevolence in something.
Right. And
If
I can
I
give you
wish
an
to live
example
in a
here.
world that is without malevolence, then it is actually God's work through me, as me, and my heart's desire to want to reinterpret and evolve away from things that describe or define something as malevolent in nature.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of funny. There's an example that definitely applies to this concept of the origins of Satan. And it's that if someone disagrees with you, you could just call them a literal Nazi, or or you could put in the effort to understand their point of view and to kind of relate. Because the interesting thing about saying so like sin is without in Spanish and con is with, and it would remind me of compassion or compasión. And with passion, with shared understanding, shared empathy, if you want to call it that, is really what, if there is this Hegelian dialect overruling over the cultural conversation or a spiritual crisis that one might be suffering, that it's easier or perhaps maybe more effective to approach it with compassion. Like in this regard, would you feel that if someone were to explore their shadow in the Jungian sense, I've heard different ideas about, you can never really destroy your quote unquote dark side, but you can tame it, which is kind of strange to think of it in an animalistic way, or to
Oh
become
no,
friends with it. Like, how would you
yeah, don't
unpack
take
all
that.
that? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So again, this becomes that space of like, why is it that darkness is automatically like, that's the belief system to deconstruct away from?
Mm,
That's the work to do in the mind, is not to like go into the darkness thinking you're gonna like face bad guys, right? You're gonna face some things that you don't really enjoy, and that, and truth be told, there are some things that are intended to be done away with,
mm,
right? Like if you looked at your mind as sort of a tree, okay, if there's a limb on a tree that's going to make the rest of the tree sick, is that something that we like have to sit there and be like, no, I love you, it's okay?
mm.
No, you cut that shit off.
Right. Right.
Okay, you save the rest of the tree, but that will decompose and return to source, right?
Yes. Exactly.
And decomposition is a whole nother part of the process that's sort of a fascination. But
Mm,
to look at the concept of the darkness of the mind as something that is actually more like the maternal, to redefine it, to understand it. And this is actually something from the concepts of mysticism in the Orthodox traditions that was unfortunately sort of lost over time.
mm.
And that is that more maternalistic nature or understanding of, Mary and the maternal and things like the
Right.
womb. That darkness is what provides a space for you to find the inner light.
Mm,
Because if you're surrounded by light, sometimes it's hard to see your own. And
mm-hmm.
that darkness is intended to be the space which you preside in, that lets you see where your light really is, that lets you truly understand your own light and understand your own knowledge and your own wisdom, and self actualize and self develop it. But again, asking oneself, okay, why do I immediately have some sort of like connotation to this meaning being, bad? or something that's going to be difficult or malevolent or evil or whatever, redefine darkness for yourself. I think everyone was pretty happy in the darkness of their mother's womb, right? A lot of people really enjoy the grandeur and beauty of the darkness of night. For a lot of folks, when they're feeling stressed out or like can't deal with reality, what do? They'll like go hide under a blanket or like put their hood on and close it and like shut the world out, basically, right? So it's about redefining it. It's definitely not about taming it. It's about understanding it, right? So this is something that I kind of learned having been someone that's worked with a lot of animals in my life, which is that the best relationships and most beautiful relationships that I've ever had with animals are not the ones where I attempted to tame them, because Lord knows I don't want to be tamed, right? Do unto
Right, exactly.
you. If you don't want to be tamed, don't dictate and tame another. But when you go into that part of your mind, it's sort of about getting in tune with the wildness as the wildness that is that more mysterious and wild nature of God that's inside of you. And not letting go of that as something that you're intended to sort of be, like you're truly actually meant to be in reverence of it, to be sort of in awe of it, right? And so it's really about getting to that space of awareness where, one, okay, how am I defining it and why? And two, why am I scared to go in there? What did I place in there, or what's been placed in there that I need to bring the light to so that I can create a new space of awareness around it? So it's not really about destroying things in that part of the mind, unless, if you get to something in there and it feels like that really thick limb on the tree, cut it off and let it decompose, right? All turn to source in some way or another, whether they're expanding outward or going back down. But as far as, the concepts that Jung talked about, he actually talked about that feminine fourth aspect that was missing from the more commonplace teachings of a lot of the Orthodox traditions that he found present in spaces like Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism, that spoke about, that feminine principle that is the nothing, right? So again, we go back to that concept of sin, right? Because what is sin? It's to be without. So the feminine principles are everything that have to do with sort of awakening those parts of the subconscious in a way that's healthy. One of the other words that I invite a lot of people to try and redefine for themselves is, I make a really decent effort to not refer to things as positive or negative, always meaning that negative is a bad thing. Okay? Because there are loads of ways in which negative is a beneficial thing in one's life. And actually having too much positive force can make something aggressive, right? So if you look at this and you kind of want to like redefine this for yourself, think about some of the belief systems that you can negate or neutralize in the part of your subconscious that would make it better for you, that would make your perspective more enjoyable for you. Think about some of the other times in your life that you've had something neutralized or negated from your life, and it's actually made your life better, or let you have a more whole experience of yourself, right? So for a lot of people, they'll look back and see the end of a relationship where maybe that relationship dynamic was really limiting them in their expression, and neutralizing or negating that relationship dynamic from their life has now allowed them to expand and become, more wholly free and wholly realized self.
But
it's kind of like, it's just to give linguistic examples, show people, okay, have that intuitive rapport. And that's everything to do with the subconscious, right? Be willing to ask yourself why the pre-existing connotation is there, especially if you didn't intentionally place it there. So, if there's a certain color that you look at, and the thing you think of as a symbolistic gesture of it is something that is just understood to you by culture or the way you were raised or what have you, be willing to ask yourself, well, do I want it to symbolize that? For me, the one that I always kind of bring up is I would see cardinals, and it would, like, before I made the conscious intent of redefining it to mean this, which is actually a symbol that's a root symbol. It's alchemically it's the verdigris symbol, but it's basically the original symbol of the cross. And that is, it's a circle with 4 quadrants in it.
Mm.
But that this is now what I see when I see like a bird, when I see the cardinal, this is what I see. But before, it would make me think of like a card, like a church cardinal.
The Pope, yeah.
Well, and it's not to say that someone should deconstruct that if they have them for that for themselves. But for
Hmm.
me, those moments where it was like, well, I don't remember putting that there.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna put what I want to put there. And
Mm.
it's just to give an example of like be willing to kind of question why the existing connotation is there. That is what the subconscious is,
Mm.
basically. It's where you hold all those symbolic, irrational belief systems. And I put irrational in quotes because, again, another word that all sorts of folks have sort of
Mm.
uh, degraded, right?
Yes.
The irrational part of the psyche is an incredibly important part of the psyche. It is the spiritual part of the psyche. It is the believing part of the mind, right? To have an imaginal experience, to have a wonderful experience that lives outside the logic of constructed consensus reality, like
Mm.
for Moses to have seen a burning bush was a pretty irrational experience to have accepted. Most psychedelic experiences are highly irrational experiences. It's an important part of the psyche to flex as a muscle and to develop. So, yet another one. Okay. If you're someone who defines negative in a way where you're like, I don't want negative emotions, well, I do, but that's because I've defined negative emotions as things that are a benefit to me.
Well
I want
said.
I want irrationality.
Mm.
Why? Because I have consciously defined my irrational mind and irrationality as an important part of my whole psyche. So again, it's just an invitation for people to think about these things and ask themselves, where is the subconscious uh, sort of definition pre-existing?
Mm.
Did I put it there? If not, how did it get there? And that can be generational, that can be familial, that can be through the media, whatever, societally, and then going to that next step and saying, okay, what do I want to be there? That's what I'm going to place there instead.
Nice, nice. And it's funny that you just earlier said, well, this is a muscle that we can flex, or it's something that we can train ourselves. And it's cool that language offers us that opportunity to retrain our thinking. And I wanted to ask you, in relation to language, but also the embodiment of, say, our nervous system and how we relate to each other through the functioning of, say, like neurotransmitters, hormones, etc. Have you ever heard of this concept of working out versus working in? And if so, would you like to expand on how you approach that?
So, of course, I'm going to give the paradox that you are always simultaneously doing both,
Mm-hmm.
but that I find that it's more powerful to do the inner work as a projective force than to try and do work out here in a very effortful way.
Mm.
That I would say the inner work is the more efficient way to approach change and work in one's life. And by the way, you'll actually burn a lot of calories doing work in here.
Yeah, I think
You know how
we
much I eat a
should have a
lot.
nice meal after
Okay.
this
And
to
I spend a
refuel. Yeah.
lot of time using this thing as if like
Mm-hmm.
I do not have a workout regimen. I have fun, right?
Fun
So
is
like
the best.
I if I feel like dancing, I dance. If I feel like going on a hike, I go on a hike. If
Mm-hmm.
I feel like skateboarding, I skateboard, right? Like these are the ways that you create the space for inner work as an expression outwardly in the physical world that for me, and I'm assuming you're kind of talking about working out, but I could be wrong. That could be my presumption. And you know what they say about assuming. But that's just kind of my take on it, is that
Mm-hmm.
I have found that it is far more efficient and effective and sustainable to do that, to do inner work,
Mm.
than it is to make a bunch of effort to try and change everything out here,
Right, right.
especially if it's in a way that you're intending to create change at a bigger level.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I mean, we're in January, so January is typically referred to as like resolution season, or like the
Yeah.
month of broken promises. But we could say, like, people who work out for the aesthetic appeal are missing the internal, let's say, another archetype, like the warrior archetype, or something else that is challenging you to rise above your current state and inviting you into deeper wisdom as well. I think that might be missed out on some of the fitness culture. But I also wanted to ask you in terms of, well, emotion, because that's something that will play a role in whatever activity, inner or outer, you might be engaged in. And not to say that their inner and outer is blended into one, but when people say that energy in motion is emotion, how do you respond?
Well, absolutely it is. I did a whole article in Brains Magazine about why there should be more friendship in the workplace,
Right.
because you kind of need that to have emotion or energy in motion in a workplace, right? Like for healthy relationship dynamics to exist, there has to be a healthy level of that like friendly rapport and connection between
Mm,
people that's genuine.
right.
Okay. But as far as that whole concept of the New Year's resolutions goes, I actually tell most people to do guiding principles
Mm,
instead of resolutions, or as a part of resolutions, so that they can understand that there's something deeper underlying that's desiring for whatever the kind of check mark resolution is, right?
yeah.
So let's say it's to go work out at the gym or to change your diet. What is the desired result that you're hoping for aside from the number on the scale
Mm,
or the number on the weight bench? Okay. Or the number on the measuring tape. So usually it's something emotional. It's a sense of self-worth. It's that you want to feel attractive, that you want to feel healthier, right? So instead of going for those sort of like very specific things, like the workout regimen, or saying that you're gonna like cold turkey change your diet tomorrow, writing writing out a sense of the guiding principles that are going to make every part of your daily life more actionable toward that, right? And sort of like using word in a way that affirms to you that you are going, instead of saying I want to be better or I want to be more well, I am wellness. Like writing that out for yourself, saying it to yourself in the morning. I am wellness. I live and breathe wellness. I trust that food is medicine for me, and that and then I have a relationship with food that is medicinal and healthy and provides wellness for me. That is actually the way in which our intuitive and subconscious mind, as a more whole intelligence, that a lot of us from a conscious level have a difficult time understanding because we can't like grasp the mechanics of it,
mm,
but that it works for us in that way, right? So, it's really about getting to a space where you realize the deeper emotional construct that you're hoping to create for yourself with the aim of the resolution, and using something like guiding principles to guide you toward that in a simple, practical, and approachable way on a daily basis. So the other one that I always tell people to focus on too is, instead of thinking about like specifically where you want to go this year or what accolade you want from the job, or whatever achievement it is, what emotions do you want to experience more of this year, right? So for me, I wanted to experience more of a sense of wonder. I want to experience curiosity more. I want to experience creativity more. I want to experience beauty more, whether that be beauty and understanding of myself, or seeing more beauty in the world. And of course, those things are correlative, right? The more beauty you are willing to see in yourself, the more you're capable of seeing beauty in the world around you. But it's making it that simple practice of, even getting up in the morning and asking yourself from that present place of awareness, of moving toward a sense of balance or wholeness for yourself, what emotions do I want to feel more of today?
mm,
Right? Some days it's that you're going to want to feel more vital and vivacious and full of energy. Some days you're going to wake up and think, you know what? I want to feel more calm and neutral today.
mm.
And so it really gets to a place of like using that as a daily mechanism to set the tone for the day, so that moving toward those resolutions, as far as what you want for yourself on a regular basis, become like attainable and approachable, instead of some unkind self-standard that you feel like a failure for after 3 weeks,
Mm.
basically.
It's really interesting. When you were explaining, this approach that you can explain to yourself or affirm to yourself how you want to feel and have that be the guiding principle. Like, for example, if I were to say that the elements played a role in the way that I would structure how I go throughout every day, like I could say just as one model that, oh, today I feel a bit more fiery, so I'm going to do X. It's kind of like this Ayurvedic model, or I know this is popular in Chinese medicine as well, that we can associate the elements with how we pattern our behavior and how we approach certain stimuli or foods and things like that. And I wanted to ask you, sort of as a means of a closing question, and I just want to say that this hour has been wonderful. I feel like I've been in a cool flow state listening to you, and I want to ask you as a means of bringing this full circle, because we were talking about this before we hit record, and I just want to ask, in your opinion, or from your perspective, uh, what do you love so much about Alice and Wonderland?
Huh. Well, I'll speak from the wisdom of my heart, which is that it's full of wonderful wisdoms.
Yes.
Um, and that, the thing that I love about Alice in Wonderland from we'll take it from the realistic perspective, which is that I have a personal belief that Lewis Carroll, while he was high on psychedelics, looking out his window, watching the little girl next door, who is actually who he wrote Alice in Wonderland about,
Mm,
was having an empathic and imaginal connection to what that little girl was imagining for herself
mm,
while she was playing in the garden.
interesting.
That state of childlike, and like really think about that, right? Because if you read Alice in Wonderland, the responses in that book, go ask a 4-year-old a similar question and you will get a similar response,
Exactly.
right? But there's a reason that that saying from the mouth of babes exists, because when we are that age, we are our most neuroplastic, we are
Mm,
our most open-minded. The irrational center of our brain is like wide open in this really wonderful way. That's why learning is easier for us, because there's been no limitation placed on whether or not we think it's easy or difficult for us to learn. We
mm,
just are, right? And so even that whole concept of I am that I am is sort of placed in that for the child, the concept of I am that I am doesn't even need to be defined. It is what they are. But that Alice in Wonderland is this book that really speaks to, and actually a lot of the Roald Dahl books too really
oh
speak to
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Hilda is another one.
Hmm.
There's a lot of wonderful wisdoms in Willy Wonka, right? Like there is something to be said for the metaphor and symbology that is archetypally present and personified in the characters. And especially in Alice in Wonderland, that whole concept of you reap what you sow from
Hmm.
wisdom,
Right.
in that you can ask 5 people to read the same passage from Alice in Wonderland and have them like journal about what it meant to them. And I can promise you that you would get at least 5 different answers, if not more.
Yes.
Right. And that for some people, it might even give them a space of revelation. It might get those
Hmm.
little synapses firing again.
Hmm.
But that is why I love those texts the most. That's why I love Alice in Wonderland a lot, especially because people open it with a less serious sense, right? Like this is
Mm.
something that's kind of remiss with some scriptural texts, is that there's this like tonality of seriousness that almost acts like a weight
It
on
is. Yeah,
the
it's very, very
availability
heavy.
of revelation from those
Mhm.
books. Whereas when you pick up a book like Alice in Wonderland, you're like, oh, I get to be a child right now. I get to
Yeah, it
play with
invites you in.
this.
It's like, come here, look.
It does. It says, be a child again, right?
Hmm.
And so I actually hope that some people will sort of remember to have that experience with scripture,
Mm.
or with sacred text, where they invite the child out of them to play with the words that are on the page and ask, what does this mean to me? As opposed to having that sort of like limiting
Mm.
tone to it, that is like so set in the seriousness or the severity of the
Mm.
information that you're realizing. I can promise you that the people who are behind the concepts of most wisdom traditions know that some of the wisest things in the world are said by children,
Yeah, that's
right?
very, very true.
And so letting that child exist in you again as a state of wonder, as an imaginal, irrational being that, has imaginary friends. Yes, I
Oh,
do,
nice.
folks. All right,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is Jock, and every time I find a feather on my walks, he gets a new one in his cap. Okay.
Mm.
So have fun with things, right? Like the next time someone goes on a walk or goes out in nature, act like a freaking child, play with things. Remember what you did as a kid when you were like playing by the creek and imagining that you were talking to the crawdads and the minnows in the water. But that is basically why I love that book. And that there are a few others. There's actually a very special book that I have that I picked up at a used bookstore that was written by two women in the early 1900s who were like school teachers.
Mm.
There are actually very few copies of it in the world, but it's really beautiful. Everything in the book, which is intended to teach third and fourth graders, I believe, around that age, right? Like it's hard to say because in the 1900s you had schoolhouses that had loads of
A
age groups.
whole community was in there. Yeah.
The kids that showed up could be anywhere from the age of 5 to the age of 10, and you kind of as
Right.
a teacher had to just like deal with that.
Mm.
That book has called to me and shared really beautiful wisdoms with me, and I know it's because the women who wrote it were trying to think of how to teach children from a children's mind. So if anyone has a favorite book that they read as a child, I please pick it back up again as an adult and have a new experience of it that allows you those deeper wisdoms or revelations as far as like, how does this correspond to me? What does this tell me about my own story, my own life in the present moment?
Well said. And what a wonderfully positive note to wrap up on. And I do want to thank you once again for coming on. And it's really cool that now we've completed yet another chapter of this story. And it's going to be amazing. As a guiding principle for myself, I could say this, Mira. My guiding principle for 2023 will be to embrace that inner child for sure. And I appreciate you for inspiring that out of me. And I want to ask you one more time. Can you share with folks if they want to contact you, the services you provide, your website, all the above? And once again, Happy New Year.
Yeah, absolutely. To you too. So thank you again for having me on. For those of you who are watching, you already know I'm Mira Taylor, but I am an integrative therapist and I provide guided wellness sessions to clients, individual, family, and couples counseling and therapy. I also provide business wellness consultation services for businesses who are interested in reintroducing an acceptance of the underlying energetic and spiritual dynamics of business and what it means to be a spiritually well business. And you can find more information about me at www.moonandrune.com. You can also follow me on social media on Instagram. I have a personal account at Mira Taylor Wellness, and I also have a business account at Moon and Rune Wellness, where I just share things that I think will resonate with people and that for me feel succinct with whatever is sort of the collective conscious experience that's happening at the time.
Right on. Thank you so much, Mira. It was good to see you again. Take care.
Yeah, absolutely. You too. Happy New Year, everyone.